This is Next Level Guest Engagement, and it's great to be here with you. My name is AJ Masick. I'm a pastor for the past 3 or 4 years at Renewal Church in Denver. And joining me also is Joe Clark, our worship arts director. You'll hear from him as well. We were both on the launch team at Renewal in 2017. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today comes from our experiences of launching Renewal and having to come up with the process and the intentionality and the framework for guest engagement, kind of from stealing it from the best and making a little bit up as we go. And we don't pretend to be experts. We want to share what we've learned and add everyone's voices to the mix. So great to have you guys here. I also accepted a new position recently at Pathfinder Church in Ellisville. And so I've been on that job for 2 days, so I totally know what I'm talking about with there. But great to be here today. As we kind of dig in, I want to start with this premise that guests are a trust from the Lord. Every guest that walks through your doors, the doors of your church, is someone that the Lord loves, someone that the Lord has been working on in their journey, right? He's been bringing them to a certain point in their spiritual maturation, in their curiosity, and He's entrusting you and He's entrusting me with the next step, right? With a critical, important step where they're walking through the doors for the first time. And so that's a trust that God gives us. If you want, you can almost think about it as a parable of the talents, parable of the minas. You don't want to take that too far, but to understand that the Lord gives us this person to take care of on His behalf and to get plugged in. And so we want to do that faithfully and to the best of our ability to honor that person and the trust that God has given to us. As we do that, we recognize that we'll do it imperfectly, but to the best of our ability. And, you know, as we kind of bring them in, we recognize also just that, you know, that person getting engaged in the community is something like I'm sorry, I'm totally off here. Joe, what am I? What's our next one? Oh, thank you. So, what I was stammering about is we want to be moving them from strangers and observers to participants and family members, right? And how do we move them along in that process? How do we get them to take the next step? There's a lot that we're going to talk about, a lot that we're still growing in. It's part of the process. And today, what we're going to cover is we're not able to cover sort of everything in this 90-minute session as we look through kind of the guest engagement process that I kind of want to lay out here before you. And some of these may be different for your unique context. You have to make those decisions for yourself. But when it comes to engaging guests, there's kind of 6 steps that we've laid out today that we're looking at. First off, we're assuming worship as the connection point in this case. There's a lot of different ways that people connect to Christian community, you know, through life groups, through serving with our community, and so forth, through neighboring. But today we're assuming that connection point is worship, and that we're going to work from there to get them to plugged in. At some point, we hope to get their contact information. That's going to enable us to have a more intentional relationship with them. We all here, you know, we care deeply about guests. We're all doing the best that we can so far, and we want to know what are some ways that we can be more intentional about this process in order to make it more effective. We're going to move along to our, you know, after we get their contact information, put them into our guest follow-up sequence. At that point, it's going to lead to, in our case, next steps. For you, this may be different. This is where you may have like your own personal thing. But for us, we decided that our guest follow-up sequence was going to be, let's lead people toward our new member, our next steps class. Because what we kind of figured out is if we can get people in next steps, then we've got like a 75% chance of plugging them in, of engaging them in a life group and serving the congregation and so forth. So if we can get them there, the rest kind of takes care of itself, and so our guest follow-up sequence is designed at making that happen. And then from there, you hope you'll plug them in the life of the congregation, in the discipleship pathway that you've thought about, how you mature disciples in your unique context. And then along the way of that, you also are going to be working on your leadership pipeline to help, you know, foster, encourage people's giftedness and raise them up to help disciple others. And so this is kind of what we're covering today. At the same time, we can't really focus on all of this. When I posted this section on the app and I was asking questions, what do you want to get out of this? We got a lot of different answers from online worship tips to, different software elements to how do you build a welcome team and so forth, and we just can't cover all of that. We're going to spend most of our time today, sorry this is in red, it's not in the best font, but we're going to be camping out right here. So this link from worship connection card follow-up sequence to getting them into new membership course. It's going to be kind of the main focus, and we're going to kind of touch the other stuff from a high level with sort of a light touch. But as we kind of lay all this out and kind of our focus for today, kind of our question just to open it up and see where people are at in the room is, where are you sensing for you and your church the biggest opportunity for improvement right now? What's made you curious and to come today?
So we've got this gap between the first-time guest and what we call Discover, which is our membership, first-time membership engagement thing. And we assumed that there was a 4-week or 4-touch-point sort of gap between them. And we're learning through research experience that it's more touch points with this culture. It's more than just 4 touch points. It's more like 10 or a dozen or more. So that's where we need the most help, is getting people for the first time guests into the membership track.
Yeah, perfect. What else? Yeah.
We have a school that is experiencing huge growth. Many non-members, non-church. How do we make church worship more inviting? As the children are scheduled to sing for services, how can we prepare for that for these people who might be searching?
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a big topic in and of itself, and it will probably be a little bit tangential to what we're talking about, but definitely super important. Yeah.
Collecting information. It's a lot harder now, post-COVID, with some of the hands-free things that we're doing. We're not getting nearly as much information as we used to.
Yep, totally. Yeah.
We know we have a base following us online that we have no knowledge of who they are. We just know that we have so many people, and trying to connect with them and find out who they are and build that relationship.
Yeah. I know I'm always hearing people, we watch your stream or whatever, and I'm like, really? There's like 20 people who watch our stream, and are you one of them? But yeah, like, how do you get from anonymous to actually plugged in and a part of things? Yeah, we'll touch on that a little bit for sure. Anybody else? And also, full disclosure, as you hear the focus of today, if this is like not what you were thinking it is, like if you need to leave now, like that's great. Like if you don't want to waste the next 90 minutes or whatever, and this doesn't fit, find a sectional. Yeah, go for it.
Sort of the best way to welcome folks in the door, just all, and like people come in and they're like, whoa, where do we go? I mean, the sanctuary is pretty easy to find because it's right there by the doors, but everything else, like our Bible studies are upstairs and this and that. It's like, how do we better do that? Putting signs, more people, it's just, there's some exploring that we're doing there to try to figure out a better way to create a welcoming environment, but also welcoming people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are some great sectionals that are going to hit that as their main topic too in the coming days. And so, okay, cool. Making sure you know about those. So as we move on, we're going to kind of start walking through that engagement process that we laid out earlier. And again, hitting worship with sort of a lighter touch so we can focus mainly on this contact info follow-up sequence into next steps as well. But I'm glad you said that, because it leads me into my next point. There are some great sectionals, because we can't cover everything, that are talking about your front door in the next couple of days that you might pay attention to. There are some sectionals that I think when it comes to web presence and social media, that's your true front door, right? That's a lot of people's first look at what you're doing. And it's super important, and we just don't have time to unpack all of that today. But then there's also your physical front door. In terms of aesthetics and environment and so forth. And, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. And yeah, I think this reminder is, Andy Stanley has this bit about the old couch. That often you can't see the old couch, but other people are seeing it, right? And so when it comes to our physical presence, I think the only thing we wanted to touch on briefly today was like just to look at it with fresh eyes, right? Or get somebody with fresh eyes if you need to. You know, a lot of times when we get community service people that have to do court order community service at church, we ask them to be our fresh eyes and to come on Sunday mornings and give us feedback. But however you do it, find a way to see the old couch that you've gotten used to. As someone who recently moved and sold 2 couches and then realized what they looked like, I was ashamed to own them. I didn't see it, but you can see it. And I think when it comes to digital, we could get into so much there, but the only thing I'll say, 2 big areas of missed opportunity are taking over your Google Maps listing and your Apple Maps listing. A lot of churches hit the website big and the social big, but taking over those elements are also really critical. Getting fresh pictures in there, fresh reviews, so forth. And a welcome video. You know, getting something on the website where people can get a peek into what it looks like as it's actually happening. You know, getting a fresh welcome video on there. But we're going to bypass that stuff for the most part. We're going to talk about what does it mean to get guests engaged. I think we know from our understanding of what worship is, right, that we want it to be participatory. It's not just an audience presenter, but it's something we want people truly active in and having parts to play in, and also relational, right? And so those are going to be what we're going for in worship. And our desire is to increase the level of participation and desire to increase those relational touch points. One person or a couple people who kind of gave us feedback about this section wanted to talk about welcome team. And so just to talk briefly about welcome team, you know, and I'll let Joe speak a little bit to this as well. But your welcome team are likely the first people who are touching base with people coming in the door, right? And we could spend a lot of time, I think, talking about, you know, how you organize your welcome team. But when it comes down to it, you know, you need people who are going to be the face of your church, to be that, you know, warm, inviting person. And I think there's always this balance between, you know, wanting to be there enough for people, but not being overwhelming, right? How do you be warm, but not stifling people as well? I mean, I don't know about you guys. I've literally had people like block the door to, you know, to talk to me, and I can't get past them until, you know, we've been held hostage for a little bit, right? And so I think, you know, when it comes to welcome team, just a couple high-level things are, how do you train your welcome team members? I think just being intentional about training your welcome team members to read non-verbal cues, to go, what does this person need from me? Do they need me to, you know, invest in high relationship and conversation? Are they wanting more space? Being able to read that is an important element of instructing welcome team. And I think one thing we have run into a lot, and if you're a pastor, you may especially have experienced this in your church, is that we constantly had to untrain people from bringing guests to the pastor. Like anybody else? It happens all the time. Like, as soon as there's a new guest, like, someone would just bring them over to me. And I like talking to people. It's great. But no, we want you to be the church. You're the person that guest is talking to. If they want to talk to me, great, right? Bring them over. But we don't just need to bring everybody back to the pastor. We need to trust that our community is actually a community. It doesn't just depend on one person. And to begin to build that web of relationships and encourage people to be confident in their ability to relate with people. Joe, did you want to say more about welcome team in terms of like planning center and all that stuff?
No, that's just huge. That I think, as you were saying earlier, you were saying like, how do you get people to feel more welcome as they come in the doors, where they go and stuff. And like the old saying was like, it doesn't start when they come in the doors, but it's when they pull into your car. And how do they feel welcome? Well, now we live in a world where it's when they get onto your social media.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like all those things going together that you will learn with that. But when it comes to welcome, I always say this to AJ, and I said this morning, we don't want the person who, you guys remember the commercial, dry eyes. Here is the, you know, you kind of want the welcome person to be that person that's not as overbearing, but also just have them to just be a sweet spirit. We can probably all of us in this room think of someone right now that you're like, oh, I love them to go to my church. I love how they, and they can be overbearing in some ways, but in a good way. So when you're building those teams or trying to focus in on that, just remember that it's just all about just making them feel at home. The goal isn't to get their butt in the seat. The goal is to introduce them to our Jesus, right? So if that is our goal and we're having those conversations, like AJ said, you kind of see some of those people bring them straight to the pastor. Just kind of be that pastoral figure yourself in that moment. And people really cling to that. When you don't become a check on the box, yet you actually become a conversation that's meaningful with them, that's when a true connection happens. And yeah, that's a beautiful thing that we've been able to see and experience.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say this too, we had to sort of make a transition. We were using Welcome Team as the team that we got untrained people into as like their first service opportunity. I don't know about anybody else. But like some of the other teams have more specialized requirements, right? You got to pass a background check to be in children's ministry. You have to, kind of know tech stuff to serve in the tech crew, or to be a musician, right? And so we're like, let's toss new people in Welcome Team. And there's some benefits to that. But what we also found is that when we were just kind of tossing everyone in Welcome Team, is people would not serve as frequently. And so they would forget the things that they needed to do more often. They wouldn't put the big banners out front, right? Or they would forget how to make the coffee or whatever else. And then they're asking you on Sunday morning how to do it. And you would have people that just kind of didn't own the process as much. People would cancel more often on us, decline. And so we actually, this was just a couple months ago, I would say 3 months ago, we made the switch to, instead of everyone is in Welcome Team and you just serve every 6 months or whatever, we really made a call to get team members that wanted to own Welcome more as their own ministry, and to be a more regular face, every couple weeks. And I think that's been huge. I don't know what you've seen since I've left, but I think we've seen more ownership of the process, and people are more capable. Yeah?
A question about, maybe it's just a name thing, but we have a Welcome Team and a hospitality team. And so the hospitality team, right now, it's mainly like coffee, or if there's, food or whatever, they help coordinate, that kind of thing. And then the Welcome Team is mainly we've got a team on the door, we've got a roving team in the local center, so that's sort of reality of more just people talking, conversation, or directing. But is there a value in making that one so that there's more involvement in all things that are welcome?
Yeah, I don't know that Jesus tells us that necessarily, right? But I actually think it raises an important point. I think when you're asking for Sunday morning volunteers, which is a bit adjacent to our topic, but I think having a simple way to lay out the opportunities is huge. So for example, at Renewal, we have 4 teams. So you can serve on worship team, which is everyone in the booth, everyone on stage, it's altar guild, it's actually a pretty big team, right? But you can serve on worship team, safety team, children's ministry, or welcome team, which handles hospitality as well as guest follow-up. And so yeah, we have subgroups within, but it's overwhelming to just start listing teams in no particular order. And I think if you can come up with, here's our teams, and really simplify it, then it helps people to get plugged in easier. Yeah, great question. So yeah, moving on from Welcome Team, I think, and again, we're trying to hit this stuff with a light touch so we can get into the connection card and follow-up sequence. But having great service info where it needs to be. I think maybe 6 months ago discovered that our static slides, or our slides that we were running before service, had just become kind of outdated. We hadn't given much thought to them. But there's some really cool stuff you can do with before service slides. You can have some great info on there, not only about the worship service, but of the culture of your church. And so to look at fresh eyes and go what are we not putting on there that we could be putting on there that would help people get engaged. I'm going to give you a link in a little bit, but we've put our whole slide deck on there, and so you can download our stuff and take what you want. But also, I don't know how many people are still printing bulletins. Okay, a lot of people still printing bulletins. Yeah, Ted.
I was just going to ask, what was that change you made from? So you're saying there's some, you made a change into some new slides. What were the additions you saw from welcome to worship? Here's these kinds of things. What did you see were the additions that helped engage more?
We mostly had slides that were pictures of ministry happening. It was sort of just to give people a vibe, which is not bad, but it's not all that you can do. And then we started to, I think we had a slide with children's church info and coffee info and whatnot. But then we realized, oh yeah, we can put a slide with baptism info. We can do our discipleship pathway sort of core elements as slides, right? We can do an info update slide. You can do a QR code slide if you're depending on how big your screen is and so forth. Any more on that one, or is that?
We also did like a giving slide that was actually a short video that showed people how to click on a link, or actually scan a QR code, or drop it in the box. But it was actually just like a walkthrough, so you necessarily didn't have to get up and say it so much that it was actually on some of those pre-service and post-service videos that really helped too.
Yeah, and pre-service we focus more on the slides that have to do with like worship logistics, things they might need to know to have a great time as a guest at the church. Post-service we add in a few more stuff, announcement type stuff, so forth. But yeah, good question. And so, yeah, a lot of you guys are printing bulletins, it sounds like, too. And that's another, obviously, great way, and to look at that with fresh eyes, too.
With those pre-service slides, are you playing music in the background or kind of getting people's attention? We found that people are usually visiting to kind of tune all that stuff out. Is there a way to, like, say, hey, there's some important stuff up here you need to be paying attention to? Or is there anything you guys have found with that was helpful?
It's hard to fight that to some extent, right? And especially if you want people socializing and greeting ahead of time, like you don't necessarily want to fight it. The reality is a lot of people are going to get their butt in that seat 4 minutes after the start, and that's just going to be the way it is. But so that's not the only way that you're giving people info. We don't do a bulletin, but on the reverse side of our connection card under the seats, we have kind of the main elements of worship, and it has info, right? So it has info about children's church, it has info about giving and generosity and all that stuff. And so if they miss it, it's still there to some extent.
I have something to add. At our church, we do a countdown video. So every 5 seconds, there's a slide about where the cry room is, or a slide about what's happening after church, or a slide about whatever. That's also sequentially counting down until our worship service begins. And that's been really helpful. So
Yeah.
that might be something to do.
Yeah, that's been.
Yeah, having a timer is huge.
Yeah, we definitely did that too. We added that kind of thing, and then we actually strategically kind of increased the dB of the music behind going to that. That made it a little bit louder, so our people know that that's kind of, because no matter what you do, people are going to be booking it in there after the first song, or they hear the first song, like, oh, here we go.
The music change can help when people hear the music like change over at that 2-minute mark or whatever. It's like almost a Pavlov's dog thing, right? Am I hungry, or is it worship time? I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious if anybody has any ideas how to communicate this information after the service starts, because our latest service is the one that starts with about half the people there. And by the time the music set's done, now everybody's in there,
Yep.
People aren't on time. And,
Yeah, totally.
In a lot of cases. Anybody do anything creative to communicate to the people that come late?
Well, again, if you're handing them something, that can help, for sure. We have a church app, which is really nice, because then they have all that stuff in their hands as well. And I think too, when it comes to the bulletin you're giving people, like, kind of, what are you going for in terms of the organization of your bulletin? We've organized it in the order of worship, so we put the elements in order to kind of give people a roadmap, and then there's kind of a second part of it that's more about events and whatnot, right? But how can your worship bulletin actually help with the worship experience and give instructions on that, and not just be info about what's happening after worship? So
we also, too, during our service, have a host who comes up during the service strategic twice, and they kind of reiterate some of that info, right? So we have a host who comes up after the first song, who welcomes everybody, kind of lets them know what the slides said, basically. Or we have a text prayer number for people in-house and online. So the host kind of helps if people miss that information to kind of not take up too much time, but kind of welcome people.
yeah.
On that same note, do you kind of have a limit of 3 announcements? Or is there a number?
That's a great question. You're getting a little ahead of us, but yeah. No, that's totally valid. We don't have a firm limit, but we'll talk more about what gets in for sure.
Just to speak to the one question you asked, we put our announcements later in the service because we saw the same thing happening after the opening worship set and the lights came back up. It's like, oh, there's the other half. And so we just intentionally moved some of those key communication pieces later in the service.
Yep, we do the same. That's smart. And really, I think, again, now I'm jumping out of order, but the welcome, I think, is more about the feel and the warmth and the energy that the host conveys, and less about the information. That's not a gospel thing, but I think for me, that's what I see a lot of other big successful churches doing. We tried it out. It seems to work for us as well, and we do announcements later on. But yeah, when it comes to getting people info, I know another thing that's had a big grow up during COVID is QR codes. Anybody else not have a single one in your church before, but now has a ton? Yeah. And if you haven't yet put them like on the pews or on the seat in front, like that's a great opportunity, right? When people are sitting all service with that QR code in front of them, that's a great opportunity. I'm curious, for those that have QR codes, how many of you have QR codes that go direct to the connection card versus to a landing page? Connection card? Landing page?
Link tree.
Yep, to a link tree. Both are great ways to go, right? I mean, if you link directly to the card, you maybe have a greater chance of getting that contact info from people. But if you link to that guide, right? And maybe to the gentleman in the back's question from earlier, maybe that's a great way too. Of if people miss it and you've got the QR code to the guide on the seat in front of you, that's a great way they can pull it up. Yeah.
We've done it where the QR code goes to the landing page, and then by the landing page, there's an opportunity to click on the Connect card. So you kind of do both.
Yep. Yep, absolutely, yeah.
I have a layer on top of our slides for the opening announcement loop that shows a QR code that stays there the whole loop. Because I've gotten feedback, I was like, I couldn't get there fast enough, and I have people wanting to scan it, but try to. So we left that up there, and it's been very helpful. And it's just Slash Sundays, and we do PDF bulletins, so that's available. First thing's a big button, and everything else is underneath.
Yeah, the QR code on the screen, that one really depends on your situation in terms of screens. We've found that even blowing ours up, like as big as this screen, you basically have to be in the front row to scan the thing. And just the further back you get, the harder it is, right? So QR on the screen is not, I don't think, for most people as effective as putting it down in front of people. Plus, then you have to keep it on screen the whole time, right? But in some contexts, that really does work, though. All right, so speaking of, a lot of resources for today's section are going to be on this website here. And so if you guys want to actually pull out your phones, do whatever, if you can scan this, go for it. If not, the link is my name. It's ajmastic.com/resources. And we're going to be sharing a bunch of resources, but we're also going to ask you guys to fill out a fake connection card a little bit later on. So if you guys want to have this pulled up, ajmastic.com/resources, or you can use the QR. So we have, the first thing I kind of wanted to call out that was on there is we have a paper connection card sample that's on there, and I wanted to walk through that real quick. Oh, do we have that out of order? No, sorry, it's in the presentation. Am I out of order? But oh yeah, that's right. Okay. So first, though, hosts, we talked a little bit about it, but a great way to engage people and to give, because we talked about engaging being participation but also relational, is having both in-person and online hosts. How many people have the online host now that have been live streaming? Yeah, it's huge. For our in-person hosts, we have sort of three touch points during the service. We have the welcome, which they're basically just sharing their name, a warm or energetic message, maybe getting a laugh out of people, and then inviting people, doing the invocation. Again, it's not content heavy. It's more, let's put a super winsome person in front of people just to welcome them and make them feel like there's a relational touch point. The host is then going to show up a little bit later on in service doing prayers. And then we do announcements at the end. For you guys, it may be different. Whatever works for you, but we just decided at the beginning, like if you're missing people who haven't gotten in the seats yet, and you want to make it more about the feeling, then postpone the announcements till later. So the host will do that at the end of service, and generally our announcements have to go through a filter, to make sure that there are announcements that are going to apply to everyone, guests as well as members, to make sure that they're largely church-wide initiatives, not small favorite projects, and it can be really hard to say no or to push things or to ask them to be truncated, but sometimes it's what you got to do. We don't have a firm number, but it could be helpful to have a firm number. Another thing too is, like, you all probably have that person that needs to make an announcement that you tell them 3 minutes and it's going to be 10, right? And for those situations, record that person in advance. Like we've put them in front of the camera. It kind of forces them to stay honest, and then there's no surprises during the worship service. It adds work for sure to kind of have that studio set up and whatnot. But if you care about the announcements not just being painfully long, that's something you can do. The online host. On the site, if you're there, you can see we actually have the online host instructions for Renewal Church posted as a sample on there, and you can see we give them posts that they can post, ideas. There's a section for if they get questions, common questions asked that they can respond to. We try not to have them just copy and paste rote so that it's the same every week, but to give them freedom to, hey, in your own words. Here's what you could do. Yeah, if the stream goes down, here's what to do. It's never happened. And so that's a resource that's available to you on the site as well. When it comes to encouraging interaction in the service, I want to ask what y'all have done. But we try in every service, right? We try and get people to laugh. We use the turn to your neighbor at times, right? Responsive readings, like our worship style is very modern, but we still at times employ responsive readings or liturgies or whatever to try and get that back and forth from people, do a best of both worlds. We also, one thing that we do is text in prayers and text questions as well. Probably many of you have played with this as well, but we'll put if this was my sermon slides, we might put a number down in the bottom part of the screen, and then people can text questions throughout the service, and we'll answer it later on. We used to answer it in service, but we're kind of just in a zone where we've phased that out temporarily. We also, the text in prayers has been great because it doesn't matter if people are watching on Facebook, YouTube, the app, or whatever, the text number is a way we can get all of those prayer requests. Yeah, Martin?
How do you do that in a seamless manner? If they're posting that question mid-sermon, and you're getting that right afterwards, when do you go back to that?
Yeah, so I never do it like in the middle of the sermon, although that's a cool thing to explore. We usually, what we'll do is we would do the sermon, I close in prayer, and then I would have the host come back out with the iPad, and we use a Google Voice number, and so it's on there. And they would just basically pick the best questions. We'd go back and forth a little bit, so it's not just the expert talking, but I'd ask their opinion and so forth, and then they walk off. And so it's nice, then you don't have to fumble with the technology, and they can kind of screen them a little bit as they read. But
that was a follow-up question. How do you screen those?
Yeah, but you know what? Even if you get a crazy one, it's an opportunity for some laughs, right? It's an opportunity to go, you know what? That one is a little off, but here's a teaching element that somehow relates to that, right? I have a lot of fun with them. So
same thing, text in prayers. Are you getting those during worship? Or are you start of worship, you're going, here's the number to text in prayers, so that then you have them when prayers happen?
Yeah, Joe has an overlay on top of the welcome, just to give people advance notice. And so then, by the time we get to prayers, which is after the opening worship set, we've got all those queued up. First few weeks it took getting used to, we got to prayer time and then people are like, oh yeah, but they've gotten used to it now.
It's also in the pre-service slides, and our live stream host posts it at a strategic time on live stream as well. So it's like at a certain time they'll post this thing saying, text your prayers in as we'll pray for them. And you know how it is. Some weeks you'll have a bunch. Some weeks they'll have none. And some people will still post it on Facebook, but that's why, or on YouTube, and that's why you have a live stream host that will connect with them and pray if we don't get to that during the service.
Yeah, and the live stream host can easily pray a prayer of their own or go into the Lord's Prayer if there's nothing, right? Yeah.
Are those prayers that people are texting being seen by everyone? Are you reading them? You're just kind of referencing, Joe and Sally, and what's that look like if I texting those prayers?
Yeah, usually I'll take the prayers from the previous week, and I will. We run a stage display, so we have confidence monitors in the back and the one running stage display. During the prayers, I'll actually put in the notes, I'll put a few requests so the person remembers the requests from last week. And then, they'll have the iPad to get requests from this week, and they'll share whatever they think is appropriate to share before they move into the Lord's Prayer. Yeah.
was to say we use a Google Doc, so our online host will gather from the chat as well as the texts, put them in.
Oh, nice.
Worship team on in front of the camera or on stage or whatever has that fresh information.
They just, the doc refreshes and they've got it all.
It's the same doc every week. And
Nice.
we even added the numbers of attendance and views online and all that stuff. We have all that information in one place every week that you can save.
Very cool. Another thing that we've played with is using Slido, which is a guest, or it's really for conferences and stuff where you get interaction from people, and then you can immediately like click the button and it shows like responses to questions, or it'll build what's it called, like a word, not Wordle, that's different, but a word cloud. Yeah. How many people doing the Wordle? Okay. But yeah, the Slido has been really cool. We tested it out just a couple times, and it's a little bit of a tech thing you have to figure out on the machine, how to superimpose it on top of ProPresenter or whatever else. But it's really neat to, in your message, go, hey, here's a question I wanted to ask you guys. How many of you guys struggle with this or whatever else, right? And then give them 10 seconds, and then you can turn right back around, and there's a graph or whatever else, right? And so that's a really cool thing that we've played with. If you can make the tech work for it, that can be really neat.
You're always going to have people, too, like no matter what you do with Slido, someone's going to send something they should have sent to the screen. And they're like, oh, I love the bass player's hair. Like, it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah, right.
And you're just, people know to toggle over from the screen if you see anything. So
that
is the risk kind of thing, but it is a great, I think, engaging moment for people. For sure.
And with Slido, there is a filter too, so it does catch some of the worst of the stuff. But and when it comes to online hosting and interaction, I don't know about you guys. We experienced a ton of chat interaction at the beginning of the pandemic, but it has kind of waned. It's been hard to engage people, but we're still giving it our best shot. I would say if you can, however you can, get people to engage in the chat or through a reaction button, which is the heart, the like, all that. There's an actual purpose to that, because anyone who's watching your stream, they're anonymous until they interact in some way, right? If they interact, then you got them, right? Then you can, after the stream, go into the that stream's, I forget what it's called, but you can go into the analytics and you can invite everyone to like your page who interacted with the stream. And so then they're going to see your stream again and more often, right? And so some of the things that we've done to encourage that, aside from just the live stream host interacting, is during the welcome, you might come up with a funny thing like, the host might, if you guys remember the dress thing from a while back, like depending on your brain, you saw the dress in one color, but not in another color, right? So the host could get up here and go, for me it's blue or whatever. What is it for you? Turn and talk to your neighbor. And if you're online, press the like button for blue, press the happy face for gold, right? And so that's kind of a fun way you can get people to actually interact with that chat, and then you've got them hooked in, subscribed to your page. So that's kind of a good way to go about it. Welcome gifts and welcome center. Joe is really our expert on that stuff. What brief stuff do you have there?
Yeah, I think just big, and we've talked about welcome, and again, this is, as you guys know, welcome can take a long time to talk about. But the big things are is we love having a dedicated space to send guests to, right? Because you've had, you can welcome guests, you can say, hey, if you'll check this out on your way out, odds are they're probably not going to look at it, they're probably going to pass this out as quick as they can. But we love having a dedicated space where they can go to and they can kind of have all the information they need, and there's an individual there to walk them through it. And something that we've learned that is really good is having kind of a feasible takeaway gift that they can have. Something big that worked for us was the Livestrong Bracelets, and the reason why we gave them to them was simple, they could wear them, the meaning behind it, but it's something that was really powerful for us was that not only are they taking God's word with them, but what can they have that can remind them during the week of what Sunday is. And that was a big thing for us. Obviously, every church has their own gear, as well as a shirt, a hat. We had, I don't know, I feel like we've tried everything.
The patch, the mug, the...
So it's like,
oh, yeah.
So it's,
if you're not doing infant onesies that you present to the family at baptism, I don't know what you guys are doing. But no, that can be a lot of fun. We have people that collect the bracelets, so we'll put Bible verses or the mission statement or whatever else. And people collect them and love them. So, and they're like 45 cents each. I mean, it's not a lot. You can get them cheaper even depending on the settings. So.
Yeah, but just that dedicated space somewhere in your church, and you might have that already, but it's that idea again, old couch,
Yeah.
look on it, like what is something that looks welcoming that we have there, that they can take with them, just something to honor them for being there, but also just something to remind them during the week of what that looks like. And everyone kind of does it different, right? Like you guys probably have things that you do or follow-up things when it comes to guests or those welcome things. But our big thing that we made at Renewal is like we want them to feel at home. We don't want to bombard them with so much stuff. Like come back next week. Hey, I'll see you next week. You want to hang out? So I want it to be something that they can take, that they can enjoy, but also that they can lean on in the rough time.
Yeah.
This session and a couple of others, the first-time guest gift has been very simple, like one thing, not a bag of stuff.
Mm-hmm. I think it's your preference. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so part of the thing that we learned in our church is give them something simple. You don't give them the whole enchilada the first time they come in there, because they may not come back, but something to remind them. But what you said about somebody engaging them with the information, that also gives the person that's engaging them an opportunity to ask a question. Oh, I don't have that information. What's your email? And so you can at least get some information potentially.
Yeah.
From those people. Loving
Yeah, that's true, and it gives them an opportunity to like. A lot of people are specific, but like, oh, I'm interested in life groups. I'm interested in serving. I'm interested in learning more about your church. And you have that person who's stationed there to have that conversation. It's not a take one of these cards and you'll learn about it. It's a hey, I'll walk you through how to get connected, or the app, or here's a QR code that we have at our welcome. If you scan this, you can get to all these things, and it just gives that personal touch. And you'll hear us say that a couple more times. A personal touch is huge.
Yeah, and it can be a little thing, right? But as long as it's personal. I think the other thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the meat here is just this idea of, I don't know about you guys, some churches do like an after service, like brief 10-minute mixer. Hey, come meet the pastor or the staff, or they maybe even do like a 15-minute orientation to the church for new guests. I don't know about y'all, I'm curious. We've tried it, and it can be cool. But I've found that unless you're a pretty large church, it's hard to get critical mass at that. And if you've just got two people hanging out after service, I mean, it gets awkward, right? And so, in general, I think we've gone away from that. But if you can pull it off, but I think it's just organically, right? If your people are hanging out and they're talking after church and socializing, I think that can work just as well. Yeah. Ted, did you have something? No? Yeah.
I was just going to say on that, we actually changed this is probably sacrilegious. We don't brew the coffee before service. We brew it in the middle of service, so it's ready after service. So it encourages that social time. We've got about 15 minutes before Bible study time and everything, and it's been very well received. It's also protecting our newly refurbished sanctuary.
Yeah, and I'm not the judge of what's right and wrong, but that's wrong. I'm just saying is you got to have it before service. Very cool. Yeah.
We had a unique situation because we're live streaming contemporary all the way into traditional and had a time in the middle. And a lot of times we have a lot of fellowship within our congregation, but the people online were missing that fellowship engagement. So we started like a halftime show to kind of go back to almost like a host and have conversation with pastors, bring on guests and stuff to have that.
Oh, that's cool.
See all the people fellowshipping behind before they go to the next service. So whether you just finished service or go about to watch the next one, we have that time there.
That's a cool idea.
It is. It's a great idea.
Another thing we briefly played with was doing like a Zoom meetup before the stream for online folks, and it kind of petered out. But I think ideas like that, I think, are really cool to explore. I can get online people connecting. Yeah. Before we move on to the follow-up sequence and the connection cards and stuff, any other stuff that we haven't voiced that you've been doing to encourage engagement in worship or around worship in the stream? Any good stuff?
We have incorporated a little bit more family dynamic, and so we'll have families pray as a family unit, or if you're alone, then you're part of the family of God. So no one should be praying alone at this moment.
Nice.
So invite someone to be part of that prayer, or the family confession, which is very awkward and a little bit hard for parents because we're asking them to confess a sin, to confess their sins to their child, and have their children tell them they forgive them. There's a lot of training there,
Sure.
We've only done it once. We're going to do it again, but that's one of those things with that family dynamic, trying to make it, it's not just all eyes up here, this is where your attention needs to be, but rather for the community, we're trying to tell you to swim, we should probably give you the swimming pool.
Yeah. I know when we've done group prayer, the feedback has been really good, you know, in service. I think as long as you do it in a way where, like if you're doing family prayer, I assume you have a way where you're not alienating singles, then yeah, I think you're good. Yeah.
One thing we do after communion, when we do the communion blessing, we also do a special blessing for the parents or any adult sitting next to a child that hasn't communed, that's not communing, if they haven't, you know, they're not doing communion for whatever reason. You know, pastor will have kind of a responsive blessing that you can do over, you know, the child or the person sitting near you that hasn't received communion.
Nice.
It's kind of a cool interactive way to, you know, for a parent and child or, you know, anyone really. I mean, I had an acolyte sitting next to me the other day, and her parents weren't near her, but she wasn't communing. She just kind of looked at me like, I need my blessing, you know. It was kind of a cool way to, you know, just engage multi-generationally and also as a family.
Love it. Yeah.
So we had what I call Sherpas, and whenever somebody either self-identified as new or was identified as new, the head of my host team would grab a Sherpa, and this person would walk with them, invite them to their seat in the pew, and this is the South, so not a lot of people know what to do in a Lutheran setting. When do you sit? When do you stand? What's communion look like? So this person would walk through worship with them, encouraging them and, you know, making them feel comfortable. Get to know their name, and then what I trained them to do was take a selfie with them, so that the Sherpa can know them by name the next time they see them, their face. And then you can send that one off to the pastor. Instead of the person, now the pastor can know that person without having to meet them. And now this becomes relational as well as participatory.
Yeah. I could see people loving that or hating it. I could see it both ways. Like, I could see it being kind of intense, especially if you're taking a picture of someone and they feel pressured.
You know,
but
it's one of those, so just like everything else, you got to feel it out.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I do this right, have I developed a relationship where I can say, hey man, is it cool? You know, I just take a selfie so I don't forget you. Okay, well, I'll see you next week and I'll remember your name anyway. Jesus still loves you.
Yeah.
We try and weave in an irresistible question. So, how many people broke an arm or broken a bone?
Yeah.
And you weave that into the sermon. So then they answer that ahead of time. They're sort of narrowing their focus back in. They've answered the question both online and in person.
Nice.
Raise your hands for chocolate chip cookies or peanut butter cookies. Somehow you got to weave that in as a pastor. That's your job. But as you know, communications, we can then sort of pull that information together.
That's smart. And that's probably also why each service should be treated as its own. There should be a meeting around each service that's coming up, right, and going, how are we piecing this together and making it all fit? So it's not just, well, the service is the same every time, so we don't need to meet and talk about it, right? Yeah. All right, last question, and then we'll move on. Or no question. Let's do it. So we're going to get into kind of our main area of focus for today, which is the connection card and follow-up sequence. It's hard to love people that you do not know. Would we agree with this? If we don't know who people are or their name or so forth, it's hard to have sort of any relationship with them. And so it becomes pretty important then, especially in worship, to further the relationship and the intentionality by getting some sort of contact information from people, and to do it excellently and effectively, but also winsomely. I remember I visited Potter's house in Dallas one time, where T.D. Jakes preaches, right? And when I walked in, I was immediately identified as a guest, and it was like, you must come to the Welcome Center. And so I'm like, almost felt held hostage. Maybe I was just too polite to say no or whatever, but it felt like I had to come to the Welcome Center and fill out the thing before service, right? And maybe for some people that's just fine. For me personally, it felt like that was very effective at getting my information. It was not necessarily winsome for me. But I think, you know, always looking at that in terms of, you know, how can we winsomely, during our welcome, you know, we do connection cards, one of the few things we mention, and we talk about, hey, we'd love to stay in touch. We use that language a lot. You know, or even make a joke, right? Like, you know, we'd love to have your information so we can keep you up to date. You know, we're going to sell it to some telemarketers too, you know, and you can kind of joke around a little bit, but use some winsome language in terms of the invitation for that stuff. You know, and you can do other things too, like on our connection card. You'll see this on the sample. But one thing that we do now is for every connection card we receive, we donate $5 to a charity. And so, you know, and we don't donate it unless we get the card, right? So we tell people, if you want to kind of participate with us, a fun way to donate to a charity and stay in touch, fill out a connection card and we'll donate $5 in your honor to, right now it's Sarah's Home, which is a home that helps fight sex trafficking. So, you know, it can be a way to encourage people, you know, and make it easy, right? If you've got the connection card QR link again in front of people all service, that's going to really encourage it as well. But when it comes to collecting information, there's a couple different ways we can do it, right? We have our connection card. You can get information through a texting service. So probably some of you guys have shortcode texting services, maybe on the seat in front or whatever. You know, text. You know, BPM to 55 whatever, and then it puts them into a texting tree that says, hey, we're glad you worshiped with us, and then tomorrow it might say something else, right? That's one way you can get in touch with people, although really you're only getting a phone number from people. They're still kind of anonymous, even though you're kind of got a touch base with them. App downloads. You know, if your church has an app, you know, apps are really great. I think the biggest thing about apps is for push notifications. You know, so you get the ability to push stuff out during the week. But again, it's more of a, we don't really know who they are. They're getting our pushes, but they're still somewhat anonymous. Social media is kind of like that as well, right? People subscribe. You can kind of figure out who they are, but it's mostly a one-way thing. Connection card is still king, right? The connection card is how you get their name, their phone number, their address, all of the stuff to really continue the relationship and the process. And so, you know, connection cards, we have them physically, we have them digitally. For the digital ones, you know, we at first just had the links, but found that the QR codes were a lot more effective. You might have found out the same thing. I wanted to just briefly share the difference between a static and a dynamic QR code. So a static QR code is a QR code that has all of the information and it goes directly to your website or wherever you're linking it to. You can Google static QR code generators, and you can download those for free usually, although they almost always try and upgrade you to dynamic ones, and you got to watch out that you didn't get a dynamic one on accident. But the static ones are simple. They don't change. They're not trackable, which is the con depending on what you want. But what's nice is there's no subscription. Dynamic QR codes, on the other hand, they're a QR code that will send that person to sort of a server or service that will redirect them then to your website. And that service or server basically gives, because it's being passed through, it gives a tracking ability, and it also gives you the ability to change the destination of the QR code after it's been printed. So that can be really nice, but you pay for that. So it's really just up to you. Do you want tracking ability? Do you want flexibility? Then go with the dynamic. They're kind of better. But if cost is an issue and you want to keep it simple, go with static. But most importantly, know what you're getting so that you don't get dynamic ones and then you don't pay the bill, and you know, 30 days later, none of your QR codes work. So.
Can I ask a question about QR codes?
Yeah.
You put them on the pew or the seat in front, right?
Yeah, we laminate them, put them on there. Yeah.
How often do you have to change those?
You don't, unless you want to change where you're sending people. Yeah.
Or we use it as a connect card to keep track of attendance, and so there are different kinds of attendance. I'm trying to get a grip on that. You'd have your Wednesday night or your Lenten service.
Well, you know, for us, attendance is not an important metric. It is a metric, and we try and take account. And we add online stuff. This is total tangent, by the way, but I love where you're going. You know, I think things like giving, life group engagement, leaders trained, those sorts of things are better indicators of health than attendance is. Attendance isn't nothing, but it's not the best either, right? And so I think that's a whole conversation to have, though, with your pastor or board of directors or whoever, is what metrics are we using to measure engagement type of deal. And if you're doing attendance as an important metric, to make sure you're measuring online stuff correctly. I don't know about y'all, but at the beginning, we had multipliers for our online attendance, and those multipliers were pretty big. Like we started out multiplying, like for every online connection, three times that, because families are watching, right? And maybe during the shutdowns that was true, that more families were watching, but especially now, I think it's much more likely to be individuals. And we've done away with the multipliers altogether, because we're just going to be conservative about it. But anyway, you got me on a total tangent there. Okay, so that's QR codes. Connection cards. I think here's where I have the paper card. I was getting ahead of myself. So this is a sample of the one that Renewal currently uses. You can see the section up top where they're entering the info, and then the stuff where they're asking for more information. The top of the card, we do the boxes because we found people's handwriting is terrible. And I think maybe the $5 thing made people just scribble anything on the card and then whatever. But the boxes help make sure you actually get what you're going for here. And I'm a believer that on a connection card, you only collect the info that you absolutely need or will use immediately, right? The longer you make this thing, the more you ask for, the less likely they are to actually fill the thing out, right? Barna did a study a while back. I know this is hard for you to see, but they did a study of millennials who were first-time guests in worship and what information they were most likely to share on a connection card. And it goes down from here, right? But it's name, last name, email address, physical address, phone number, and I'm like, really, millennials? You're going to share your physical address above your phone number? But social media and so forth, right? And so my whole thing is, why not design your connection card this way? So actually, if you back up, Joe, our connection card is designed in order that the Barna study went, right? So it's first, last, email, phone. The thought is, if you do them out of order, I don't know, this is a small nitpicky thing. But right, if we did address up here, then they might get to address and then bail on the card, right? They might go, I'm not filling that out, right? We're done. So my thought is, put the level intensity goes down so that you're more likely to get this information before they bail on the card, if they're going to bail on you, type of deal. All right, but the second half of the connection card, this is going to play a big part in kind of our follow-up sequences later. But finding concise ways to put your connection card options on there. I know a lot of times our cards just have tons of info. And again, we have a sample card available for you at the website, ajmastic.com/resources. But so we've kind of classified them to try and make it easy and simple for people, right? If you're wanting to get connected, here's what you do, right? If you're looking for information, if you're looking for serving, and those are the 4 teams that we talked about earlier, right? And so we're trying to keep it as simple and clear and concise as possible, right? Our online connection card, if you actually go to that link I gave you, if you're there now, we'd love for you guys to submit an online connection card, because this is going to help us later on when we talk about workflow to have, and I swear I'm not going to use your info. I'm just going to delete. I set up a trial Planning Center account that will be deleted. But yeah, if you go to ajmastic.com/resources and then go to sample online connection card. If you'll just fill that out right now, if you're a good sport, that would be helpful. We'll get to that in just a second. Did I see a question? No. Yeah, you might. We'll see. You never know what I'll do with your information. Yeah.
I'm interested in serving. Do you find that new guests that you're looking to serve?
Sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. Sometimes they're like, they're in, And at Renewal, we work really hard. This will show up more in our follow-up sequence. But we like volunteering as a huge goal of ours. And so it's one way that you reinforce it. Even if they don't check the box, they see right away that it's a priority. And then sometimes I think it's the 3rd or 4th time that people come before they fill out the card. And by then they may be ready to actually take a next step when it comes to serving. So, all right, thanks for filling that out if you had a second. Before we get to that, though, yeah?
Is this included with Planning Center, or is this an upgrade, the connection card? Yeah, because it's going through Planning Center, right?
It is going through Planning Center. Let me get to that in 1 second here. So, but just to touch on them before we move hardcore into the Planning Center follow-up stuff, if you use texting shortcodes, one thought I have around texting shortcodes is they can be really helpful as long as I think you write what's getting texted really well, so that it seems like it matches your church DNA and identity super well. I think if you're subscribing to a texting thing and it seems like super impersonal, but you're a 100-person church, that's not a great match, right? And we'll talk more later on, but I think a strong case could be made that, especially if you're a smaller church, using an autoresponder might not be the best indicator of the sort of church you are, and that actually doing manual texting responses, while it introduces a little bit more complexity, it might be a better fit for your congregation, and it might be more relational. So we'll talk about that in a second. I'm curious, for those that use texting shortcode services, what do you use? Just shout it out. Anybody?
Would that be like text in church?
Yeah, text in church is one.
Pastor's line.
Pastor's line? Okay.
Realm gives us one.
Realm, yep. Let's see, one that I wrote down is Clearstream, because they have like full Planning Center integration, which is really nice. I think they're pricey though. Okay.
Well, can I throw something out real quick? So when you ask about using like text in church, and then you're saying that it might not be great to do that, we agree. So we have a process, that we use with text in church, but after the first time person comes, we also have a manual. We send them a bomb, and
Yeah.
pastor sends them actually.
You're reading my playbook here. I love it.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I love it.
And then you give a personal touch, and then it continues on.
I think you're hitting it. And not that texting shortcodes are wrong. I mean, so the church that I now serve is quite large, and so it may be more natural and more in sync with the feeling of the church, like to get an auto response from there. It may fit really well, right? But yeah, I think if you're a 75-person church, getting an autoresponder might not. I would encourage you to think about manual responses, but we'll get to that. Okay, guest follow-up sequence. So, if I think the issue that often happens in churches is we get a connection card, we get a phone number or whatever, we maybe call that person, email that person, toss the card in a file folder, and that's our follow-up sequence. I've been a part of that. I don't know about you guys about how involved your follow-up sequence is, but I think when we come to guests being a trust from the Lord, I think we can be much more intentional about moving them from observer, curious, stranger, whatever, to engaged through more regular touch points. I mean, you talk about on social media when you're advertising to people and getting in front of people, it takes a lot more than one ad for people to click on it, that sort of deal, right? It's the same thing, I think, in the church world. When you're developing a relationship, just sort of one and done is not really relational at all. It's a start, but I think with, hopefully you can see in a second, it's not very overwhelming, and hopefully without too much effort, you can actually totally ramp up your follow-up sequence, and you can partially automate elements of it with workflows to really help take engagement up to the next level. The first thing you want to do, though, I think, is to think about your goal. So back up one slide, Joe. Thank you. So when it comes to your follow-up sequence, what is it leading to next? I think for you, you have to answer that with you and your church leadership. I mean, it could be that your next step to people being in worship is get them to serve. Like, maybe you're a church that downplays membership to some extent, and you're like, it's more important for us to engage people in serving. We're going to do that, right? Or it's more important for us to get people in a life group. We're going to do that. Any host of things. You might decide that for your community, that's the first sort of win that you want. That's the best thing that you can do for your guests, and the best care you can provide for them is to engage in some way. For us, we've found that next steps is that thing we want to get people to, because then it leads to other really good things. But for you, it may be different. And so looking at your goal and then building your sequence backwards to really drive toward that goal is really helpful. When we first started doing the guest follow-up sequence, we got really giddy, and we kind of saw like, oh, we can automate all these touch points, and we just started tossing different things out with like no thought to how they actually led toward anything. And so it was kind of sort of a shotgun effect of, we had some thought around it, but we were just in general tossing out things about the church and the ministry without kind of building a journey into it, which is something that we've had to go back and to do. And so, yeah, think about your goal to look at that journey. For us, Joe, if you want to pull that up, the follow-up sequence, not in Planning Center, but the graphic. Yeah, thank you. So this is a graphic illustration of our follow-up sequence, and I'll just kind of walk you through it as an example. This is on the website as well. And so you can get this, you can download it as an Excel doc and save yourself a lot of time. But these are the weeks that run horizontally. This is Sunday. This is day one, where they fill out a connection card, paper or digital. And when they fill out a paper connection card, you have to have a way to get that into your digital workflows. So we actually have an online form that our welcome team uses. When they get a paper card, they just enter that in, so it all ends up in the same spot in digital workflows. And you can also talk about, well, a card from someone in person, you might want to follow that up differently than a card you received from someone online, and we can kind of talk about that. But in general, for now, when a connection card is filled out, this is day one. We hope they'll leave with a gift, perhaps, and get a welcome text the same day. We really believe that a same-day touch point is impressive for people and is winsome. And so our welcome team, either our leader or our lobby welcome attendant, it's their job to actually text that person after worship. And so, you're driving, you're on your way home, you already got a text that just says, hey, thanks for worshiping with us. Here's a link to our app if you want to stay in touch.
I want to stop there. So it's welcome person, just text from their own phone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You could do it differently. You could set up a Google Voice number, have everybody use the same, or do whatever. But for us, I mean, Renewal is a 125-person community. Oh. Keep it more relational, type of deal. But for you, you can decide what to do. The second day, they get a phone call from me just saying, hey, thanks for worshiping. We're a church that really cares about this and that, and we hope that you'll join us and find out more, whatever it is. This is a little bit controversial, but my thought is consider using Slido. Anyone know what Slido is?
What does that say? It's controversial. 20% said it's controversial. I can't read it.
Slido.
Yeah, I'm explaining it. But so Slido is an app that you can use to bypass someone's ringer and just leave a voicemail on their phone. And so one interesting thing, I want to just toss this out for you to think about. So some people, especially if they're getting a call from a pastor, that can be a little bit intimidating for them, right? And so using Slido to just leave a voicemail could be a way of avoiding the intimidation for them. It could be a way of just managing your time well. Maybe you don't have time just to be getting in a ton of conversations, but you can just do a Slido, knowing that you know exactly how long that's going to take. And then the person, they probably just thought that they missed a call or whatever else, and they go, oh, that's nice, they left a message for me. It's a personal greeting, right? I'm not saying this is 100% what you should do, but it's worth considering. There are some potential benefits to using Slido, yeah.
So when you use that or a service like that, do you just record one message and then you send the same one over and over to all your guests?
No, I mean, you have to actually phone it in.
Oh, you actually?
Yeah, you have to, Yeah, I know.
That'd be super fly now.
I know, right?
Extra fee.
Totally. But there's, Renewal's still small enough where, like, usually if there's a guest, like I've seen them or maybe bumped elbows with them or whatever, and sometimes I just judge it. I'm like, that person seems like they really would want to call, and so I would call, and sometimes I'm like, I didn't connect with them at all, or they seemed super shy, so I'm just going to give them a slide dial. Something to think about. That's usually your members, but on day 3 for us, they get a welcome email that basically says what I said in the voicemail, but in the email. And sometimes I'm like, hey, tomorrow you're going to get an email from me, has some social links. If you want to stay in touch, you know, and see what else is going on, you know, you can follow those. Give it a little bit of, yeah.
Sorry. I'm still struggling with the not getting the address, because to me, I think everyone in this room gets so many emails, and so many of them are junk.
Yep.
I just really feel like a hand, you know, or type letter, a letter with what you want to say is something different.
Yeah, and you might be right with certain elements of the population. Yeah. I would say we save the address for next steps. So once people are taking next steps, we know that they're somewhat in. And then we get the address when they sign up for membership or they complete the class, because we know that it's easy to get and it won't drive anybody off. But, I mean, those are the decisions you have to weigh yourselves, right? Just because we decided to do it one way doesn't mean that you shouldn't, type of deal. Yeah?
Yeah, Jake, just, you know, piggybacking on that, Barna said that 98% of text messages are opened up and less than 20% of emails are opened up.
Yep.
So I think it's really interesting in your sequencing that you get the number 1 opened up first, the second most reactive second, and then the third is what you have next.
Totally. Yep. And those are the next level things to think about too when you're designing this.
What do you do, like, with the address for us? We're working through this. If somebody's visiting from out of town, like, you don't want to trigger all this for them, do you?
You can remove them from the workflow. We can show that in a little bit. Or people can self-exclude from the workflow, or they can just get all of your communications too. It doesn't hurt.
Or
but
they can just participate in your streaming.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think too, if we are doing a relational ministry, when you come and you invite them to join you in this project, in this venture mission, kind of intimidated. Well, you care about me or you care about your ministry? So what I do, since I've been in sales, I had to trigger what is in your heart, what is your need. Hey, how are you? Thanks for visiting us. And here, whether it's the contemporary traditional service, I approach them. They know that I'm a pastor. I say, hey, thank you for visiting us. And in the valley where we are, there's a lot of winter Texans.
Yep.
So if they're temporary there, the first thing I wanted to have is their heart. Is there a prayer request you have? Then I know.
Yep.
This is where it is. And then I provide for
And
them.
we do the prayer thing too on our sequence. It's so winsome. Yeah. And so, you know, you can see the rest of it. Basically, we design it so that week 1 is about staying in touch with us. We give them the app, the social media, the stuff that they need to continue to stay in touch. And by the way, if they put their email on the connection card, you don't need any further permission to put that in your mailing list. Just do it, type of deal. And then, you know, week 2 is about solidifying the relationship, right? They get a postcard, we prayed for you. You might send them an email that has a video of you talking about mission and vision, or some recap of a mission project that you've done or something. This is more to kind of get to know us. So I guess not so much a mission project, but it's really more like what makes renewal, what makes the DNA of your church. Week 3, we start to introduce the ideas of making a difference, because this plays into our next step. So our goal is to get people to next steps, and our goal after next steps is to get them 1 in a life group and 2 volunteering on Sunday morning. So we begin to subtly reinforce those, right? We'll send an email about maybe service stuff that we're doing in the city to show the value of serving, or a member story of Adam's story and how he got connected at the church and it changed his life. We begin to reinforce some of that. Week 4, we intro the idea of our next steps course, and then week 5, we actually do a more firm invitation. That's just a way you could do it.
Is this chronologically week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or their touch point week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
It's you can think about it as days, right? So there's day 1, 2, 3. Once they fill out a connection card, it triggers a process where these things happen on the days following.
So this is chronological. It isn't like they came back 3 weeks later. That's
oh yeah, this happens whether or not they come back.
Okay.
Yep.
Have you ever used or heard talked about Aweber as a way to help some of this?
Aweber?
Aweber, the automatic email thing, you put it in and triggers a sequence of things over a year and a
Yeah. That's exactly the stuff that we're talking about, right? So the second part of this is going to be showing people how to digitally workflow this using Planning Center. It doesn't do email terribly well, and so you know, yeah. But there are services like that do it a lot better, right? And so you could have a workflow. Hey, put this person in Aweber now, and it triggers that. You know.
Two questions. First, we're sending them a postcard. When did we ask, or when did we gather that address will be placed in the postcard?
You know, if they've signed up for Children's Church or something like that, you might have the address, or if they've done like the info update or anything like that. This isn't our actual process. I kind of like put this together as a sample. So you're right, that maybe is a potential flaw in the sample here, is because we didn't collect address. But to that point, you have to adjust this a little bit based on what info you have from people, right? If they didn't fill out a phone number, then all of the blue boxes are gone, because those are texts, right? If they didn't do an email, then all the yellow boxes are gone, right? And you maybe have to try and tailor this for what information you have.
Second question.
Yeah.
So after 5 weeks, you're inviting them to the next steps or new member or whatever class.
Mm-hmm.
How often are you having those classes? So what if you only have that class like 3 or 4 times a year? Now you just put them on a queue. What happens in that dead space for the next 6 weeks or so before you have that class?
Yeah, what we've done is usually at the end they do fall into like an invite to next steps queue, and whenever we've got a couple people in the queue is when we schedule a class. And we're still small enough where if we've got 8 people interested, we'll touch base with them ahead of time and go, what works for you? Or we'll do a doodle. Doodle is a scheduling service that you can use. But yeah, we're still pretty personal when it comes to that stuff. And yeah, we don't just run next steps all the time. If you're a bigger church, maybe you do run it pretty frequently. But for us, yeah, we have to kind of wait until we have enough people to run the course. Type of deal. I want to move along so we respect people's time. So Joe, if you'll show people the workflow on Planning Center. So your church management system, it may be any host of any different things. I'm showing you guys Planning Center because it has a great workflows feature and it's really accessible. In fact, their Planning Center people, the basic database function of Planning Center is free. The other services they do are add-ons, and the whole ecosystem is really cool. Once you're using a lot of the products, it's really neat to get the cross-compatibility in between them. But anyway, I digress. So on Planning Center, actually show them the form. So under Forms is where you would build out like your digital connection card that you could embed on the website or link from your stream. Oh no!
Sessions over.
Oh, that's sad. Hopefully we'll find it. Oh.
Now you need the address.
We're all rooting for you, Joe. Nice. Who's Mike? Let's connect to him. But okay. So, yay, Joe. This is where you would build out a form. Go ahead and click that so they can kind of see. 35 submissions. Nice work, everyone. Just click on the text. Yeah. So in Planning Center, you build out your form. There's like drop downs and things like that, like almost probably any form builder you've seen. What's really neat about Planning Center, though, if you go to the Fields tab, is their workflow fields. So on the right, you see the workflow fields boxes. You would just drag and drop those into the card. And if you click on this one, this is a workflow fields box. Just click anywhere, Joe. There you go. You can see when they choose that option, then I can punt their response out to different workflows based on the options they choose. And so then if you go to workflows, Joe, they can see we've got a bunch of workflows set up. And a lot of these, because this is a sample, I haven't really fleshed out like all of the workflows. A lot of these are one-step workflows. But yeah, if someone clicks connected or interested in life groups, they would drop in a workflow, and then our life groups director would follow up with that person in a more personal way, right? Or if they're interested in next steps, then they go on the list. If they're interested in baptism, then the pastor would follow up. And if you'll just click on any one of those, what's really cool about the workflows is you can build out each step here, and then you can assign who answers that step and it will send them an email when they've got a new workflow person. And if you click on Edit Step, the pencil, you can also set expected response time for that set and snooze. Snooze is really cool. Usually with the boxes on the connection cards, I actually snooze those for a day or two so that they're not getting barraged with a lot of ministry leaders reaching out to them at the same time that our connection card main sequence is kicking off. Joe, if you'll go to the main connection card workflow. There you go. Oh, so I messed up. I didn't trigger the automations to drop everyone in the connection card. That's my bad. Usually in all of these workflows, you can set up an automation to drop people in a second workflow if there's a response. And so that's what I should have done. But anyway, if you'll go there. So anyone who fills out a connection card, even if they didn't check any boxes, they get dropped in our general follow-up workflow. This is the software workflow version of what we just showed you guys earlier in the graphic layout. This is what it looks like when it's plugged into the software. And so basically, on Sunday, welcome text, it would have our welcome leader up there. He would get send the text. And then, there would be a workflow card here. Actually, let's go to one of the other workflows just so they can see the card, since I messed that part up. So any of them. So if you go to this step, you see different people are dropped in to the workflow. And let's say Joe has already followed up with Jordan about, I think it was life groups. You can click the box and then click the check mark to move it along. And that moves it along to the next phase in the workflow. This one doesn't have multiple phases just because it's a sample, but you see what I mean. All right, so in the workflows though, for the connection card follow-up, you can set different people for each step to follow up. You can put instructions for how they're supposed to follow up, and you can just move cards along. And we also set the snoozes in here so that they don't happen one after another, but that they happen more or less along the calendar that we've set up. The other thing you can do with this too is if you use, what's that texting service? If you use Clearstream, that you can set it up so a workflow step will trigger Clearstream texts to people, so you can automate that part of it. You could also set up a workflow, like you could set up a day one workflow item to drop people into an email responder, and then in that email responder you could workflow out where all the emails need to happen, since Planning Center doesn't do email super well, right? So anyway, I just wanted to introduce conceptually, this is how you plan out the sequence, and then you begin to build it in the workflow software. One question somebody already asked me is, what about the issue of annoying people with too many contacts? I think that is a valid question, and I think the answer depends on your unique context and what you think people can handle. I think also one way we get around annoying people is we use text, we use emails, we use push notifications, we use snail mail. And if you kind of spread it out, it won't feel like they're getting 11 texts in 1 week type of deal. Let's see here. And I would say err on the side, like if you're not sure, like is this right on the line of annoying people, or is it necessary? I would say err on the side of too much instead of too little. I would not want another person to say I attended church and nobody welcomed me and nobody said anything to me. I would much rather be a little overbearing than that. Okay.
Can I just ask a quick question? With
Yeah.
the tool that we're looking at, the different people that are involved in it, they all have an account on this platform.
Yep.
They log in and they know their workflow and what's expected of them. And so there's not a, like, it doesn't trigger, hey, here are the 6 people you need to call today. Like, that doesn't get sent. They have to be logged in.
Yeah, you have to train people on the process, and it will email them every day until they mark card checked off.
You got a card. Like,
Yeah.
2 days later, it's like, remember you got a card. 3 days later, it's like, the pastor will punch you in the face if you don't do this card.
Yeah,
So it's like,
and you have to train people to do that, right? Because if they delay a day, then they've thrown the whole rest of the workflow off. So I mean, you can get around that by creating multiple workflows so that each person's responses doesn't slow down the process, but then it gets messy. Yeah, Sam?
I was going to say doing more rather than less. can't assume that they're seeing every touch that you're sending out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Totally. Yeah.
Question, do you have a resource that we can use as a training way for those volunteers who want to do the welcoming? Sometimes, some people feel excluded because they're introverts, they're not extroverts. So maybe we can use them in the back side, like making phone calls. Do you have any resources for that?
I don't know if I quite got your question, but in terms of how to...
Do you have resources for training those volunteers who are doing the phone calls?
That's a good question. I'll have to look in my files and see if we've got something for that. I don't know that I have anything written up.
But not anything. I reached out to you before, so I was thinking about it.
Okay. Yeah, I think most of our training resources are pretty hands-on instead of put together as a presentation. So I'm not sure I have anything totally written up. But I think no matter how you do it, you have to think about how you're training people. All right, moving along. I think if you want to go kind of next level on some of that stuff, I think you can also take any emails you get. You can, if you're social media savvy, you can create retargeting ads too. If you know what that is, then this might be you. But you can upload email contact lists to Facebook and so forth, Instagram, and you can create retargeting ads so that now that people have filled out a connection card, they're also seeing your ads on Facebook. If that went over your head, that's okay. But if it didn't, that's one way that you can also integrate social media into the follow-up sequence. All right, we're going to wrap it up here in the next 10 minutes. I wanted to talk about new member classes, though, with some depth. And Joe, you can always go to that doc if you want. But new member classes, I think when it comes to best practices around those, I think the first thing that usually comes to mind is length. A while back, I did some research on churches in our area that were crushing it with young adults. And what I found in terms of length was a little bit all over the map, but generally was in the neighborhood of like 2 to 4 sessions. There are some programs like Alpha that's like 12 weeks. And I know some church membership courses are like 10 weeks or whatever else, right? I think you always have to balance intensity and what people are going to sign up for versus sort of, we actually want people to show up and not be overwhelmed and to actually commit to it. And I think too, like sometimes I saw courses where it was like 10 one-hour courses. And I'm like, well, you could do the same in 5 2-hour courses. And I think most people would probably prefer that commitment over 10 sessions. But yeah, I think when you look at the length, you have to kind of ask those questions of what can we reasonably expect from people. But I think more than that, you have to get down to this idea that if you want to raise up disciples of Jesus, it doesn't matter if you have 3 sessions or if you have 20 sessions, it will not be enough. So I mean, if you're looking to raise up fully formed disciples of Jesus, your next steps class, your new member class, like it cannot be the end all be all, and then it drops off and nothing else ever happens. It's going to be ineffective no matter how much the length is. And so I think that should force us all to think about what does our discipleship pathway look like after next steps, and not just try and cram everything into next steps. And it ends up being this massive content dump and people's eyes glass over, right, and so forth. One thing, so with our next steps courses, I think another thing to talk about is location. And this is an issue of scale as well. But picking a location that really works with your church culture is really beneficial, right? I think you always want to provide food and childcare as kind of a basic thing. But do you do it at church after worship? That might be more convenient, right? Do you do it at a house on an evening? We've done it both ways, and I think for me the size of your group really dictates a lot of that. In our coffee lounge, like 5 people taking a class, it seemed like we were in a cavernous space, and it seemed really impersonal. But once I moved those smaller 5-person classes into my house around my dinner table, then we were having a lot of fun, and it felt really natural, felt really good. We've actually done most of our next steps courses at my house of late, just because it fit the vibe so well. But again, if you got 25 people, that's an issue of scale for a house, and it's going to fit a lot better in a church space, right? I think The other thing that we've tried to do is sort of just use Next Steps as a primer for what comes next we do it in 3 sessions. And the first session, this is all on the website. You can download our whole Next Steps packet. But in the first session, we're just trying to introduce people to like what is the church, who is Jesus, and kind of who we are as a church story. The way we tie those together is we say everyone has a story. Our church has a story. Here's a little bit about it. What's your story? Here's the story of Scripture, and so forth. So we kind of make it a whole story thing. That's the one that we invite our elders to be a part of, so they can have a little bit of relational touch point. And if you're a small church, it gives you some critical mass, which is never a bad thing. Session 2 becomes sort of what is worship. It's sort of central to the life of the congregation. We invite a lot of our ministry leaders to come and to be introduced during that time. You know, you're talking some doctrine of word and sacrament and so forth. But it's really here's why we make some of the choices we make in worship. Here's how you can engage going forward and kind of know what we're up to. And it begins to prime the pump for getting them to serve as well, because they're meeting some of those serve leaders. And then our third session tends to be, what does the church look like on mission in community? And so we focus heavily on life groups. We invite our life group leaders to come and have personal connections with the guests that are there. But our whole goal behind Next Steps, and again, you got to work backwards from your goal, right, is to get people to volunteer on Sunday morning and to join a life group. If we know those 2 things, then that has been the win, because we think that's, in our context, what's going to help people on their spiritual journey the most. And so what we do in Next Steps is designed to get people there. And so I think with life groups, you have to be a little careful if that's new to your congregation's DNA, or I think this day and age, you're lucky to get people to do 1 spiritual thing a week, let alone 2 or 3. And so we believe life groups are like a huge part of discipleship, but you have to be careful not to guilt people or make them feel like they're not a part of the church if they're not doing it. Sunday serving, for us, it's been huge. Like, we have an over 90% serve rate amongst our members because we train for it. And even in the new member course, when you're signing your new member paperwork, your membership covenant, on the back, it's like, what area of service are you interested in, and what life group are you interested in, right? And sort of it implies or reinforces this idea of here are those next steps, right? I think if we were to flesh it out even further, we would probably even have like a first life group curriculum that person would go through next, or with a new life group before launching into full life group life. But our discipleship pathway would then come next, with life group being a heavy part of it, serving being a heavy part of it. We have some other programs that help with discipleship, but those are the 2 big things that we want to come out of Next Steps with. And so I think, another thing too is Next Steps is where we give people some initial swag. So, if you're a new member, if your guest, let me back up. If your gift on Sunday morning is like a piece of logo gear, I'm not sure why anyone would take it if they're like not really sure they want to be in on the church. Like, why do I need a renewal coffee mug? I don't know yet, right? So give them something they do care about, right? But at Next Steps, it can be a really cool thing to give people the coffee cup and the shirt and the pen and whatever else. It doesn't cost you very much, but it's an element of ownership that they appreciate, right? And so that's kind of the new member stuff, discipleship pathway, leadership pipeline. And then some resources I want to give you as we leave for continuing education. Pro Church Tools is like the go-to place to get stuff about this. If you want to know more about guest follow-up, best practices for engagement, social media marketing, like Pro Church Tools is a really great, subscribe on every social media they have, because they have great stuff. And then, there is a Lutheran Communicators Facebook group that's run by a couple friends of ours, LCMSers, and so that's a great group to be on as well. That's pretty much it. Any final thoughts, final questions? Yeah.
What level of engagement do you guys have from middle schoolers, elementary schoolers, those service opportunities?
Yeah, for us, because we're a church plant and we have hit younger people, this is a little bit tangent, but I think pastors, your sweet spot is people 10 years younger than you. I'm 38. We have a lot of people in their late 20s, early 30s, and most of them tend to have young kids. So we actually don't have a huge middle school ministry. But that being said, I think most churches would have more of a middle school presence. And I don't know about you, I think middle schoolers eat up serving for breakfast. I mean, they love it. That's where I was as a young person, was serving. And yeah, I think that's a huge win for engaging them and continuing them in youth ministry and beyond. Yeah, good question. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you coming.